Тағы да бәріне саламатсыздар ма? So my name is Serkbolsun Tastanbek, and I used to work at Astana IT University during the first 2 years of the university's existence. And right now I'm a PhD student, or a PhD candidate actually, at the University of British Columbia. I'm doing research focused on teaching English as a second language or as an additional language. And this is one of the topics I thought that might be relevant to the instructors at Astana IT University because it is directly related to academic writing instruction, right? And I want to kind of explore and maybe think about adapting genre pedagogy informed by several theories such as systemic functional linguistics and translanguaging with you all here. But before we go any further, I want to ask a few questions. So it's just like kind of a warm-up, right? So I'm sure that you are familiar with different genres of academic writing, and I wonder which ones you are teaching right now, like any kinds of texts that you teach your students. Және өздеріңіз сабақ берген кезде қандай академиялық жазба жанрларын үйретесіздер студенттеріңізге? Эссе түрлері немесе резюме немесе кез келген текст. Қаласаңыздар чатта жазсаңыздар болады жауаптарыңызды, немесе you can leave your answer actually by unmuting yourself here. Just let me know.
Serkbolsun Salem, once again.
Salam.
You might, yeah, I'd like to answer your quick warming up question. You might remember the type of essay we teach our students. It's pretty similar to these. Yes, we do teach students to develop essays, problem solution essays, and compared essays. And with academic writing course, the aim is to teach students to develop a conference proceeding, be slightly different to essay writing, but yeah, this what we teach.
Thank you so much for sharing that. And I feel like all those genres look different in different contexts, like Kazakhstan and maybe the US and Canada, as well as there are differences in the different languages that they use to write those, right? Because I imagine that their conferences are not always in English, right? So I guess there should be some considerations for that. And today I want to ask some questions related to considering students' linguistic background while teaching them specific genres of academic writing. Яғни біз студенттерге қалай жазуды үйреткен кезде олардың бірінші, екінші тілдерін қалай ескереміз, сол сұраққа бірге жауап берсек деген ойым бар. So today I invite you to join my exploration basically of genre pedagogy, which considers students' linguistic resources as well as specific theories of language, such as systemic functional linguistics and translanguaging. And яғни біздің кездесуіміз бұл менің лекциям емес, яғни бірге диалогқа қатысу деген сияқты осындай форматта өткізгім келеді. So feel free to ask any questions or leave any comments and question what I'm saying too, because what I'm saying is not some preach, right? So it's something that I am also exploring as a researcher. So let's go. And in my presentation, I want to cover a few things related to Kazakhstan's context, such as policy, translanguaging, and genre pedagogy, based on some research, as well as culturally sustaining systemic functional linguistics as something that might work for us as instructors of academic writing in different languages, right? Not just in English, but also Kazakh and Russian. Яғни бұл жерде қазақ тілі, орыс тілі, және де басқа тілдерді үйрететін мамандар бар ғой, дұрыс па? Соны ескерсек болады. Then we can explore what genre pedagogy is and what kind of things are typically used in genre pedagogy, such as TLC, genre and register analysis, which I will explain a bit later. And then what we can do with translanguaging, writing pedagogy, and design cycle. And then at the end, I want to kind of propose a specific framework in which all of these ideas are merged together. And I call that translanguaging genre pedagogy, right? And then there will be some implications and conclusions based on all this. So let's go. So first of all, I guess it would be good to build some understanding of what SFL is and also what translanguaging is. So have you ever realized that you have been doing something without knowing its academic label? I think that happened to me both with translanguaging pedagogy and genre pedagogy. I think that there are a few people from Astana IT University who completed their masters there, right? So, and you probably can relate to what my experience, because during my MA, I discovered translanguaging, which goes beyond the embodiment of how I dynamically make meaning while drawing on my multilingual repertoire, right? It is also a pedagogy, theory, and methodology. And both precarious and playful. I think translanguaging lends itself to rejecting monolingual thinking about multilingualism and creating a third space for growth and empowerment of multilingual individuals like the students that we have in our classrooms. So what do I mean by translanguaging? I think that you might be familiar with Shala Kazakh or Konglish or Chinglish and other variations of languages, right? Which are somewhat in the middle of named languages like Russian, Kazakh, and English. Yani студенттеріміз де өзіміз де арасында кейде басқа тілдердің сөздерін қолданып жатамыз ғой. Соның өзін translanguaging деп қарастырсақ болады. Бірақ ол тек қана тілдерді араластыру емес, сонымен қатар тілдерді бірге қолдану және де тиімді түрде тілді үйренуге жатқызуға болады. But what about genre pedagogy? This is something I discovered while taking a course on second language writing at the university where I'm working right now. So I realized that during my MA, the EAP instructors and some professors used genre pedagogy, right? And I borrowed this idea to teach EAP later at Astana IT University. I think that at the very beginning of our work together, I suggested certain stages of teaching writing, and I think that all of you remember those ideas, and I will share some work later. And I think that it may be familiar to you. And genre pedagogy is commonly used in teaching English and other languages, right? Specifically the genre text in this language that we are teaching with you. So this pedagogy may build on systemic functional linguistics and teaching and learning cycle. So teaching and learning cycle is called TLC oftentimes, and it tends to reproduce persistent English-only norms, which promote a deficit orientation toward multilingual students. Yani бұл жердегі проблема студенттеріміздің біз қазақ тілін, орыс тілін немесе басқа да тілдерін біз жиі қарастыра бермейміз, дұрыс па? Себебі бізде бір стандарт бар, яғни ағылшын тілінде ғана үйрету деген. Сол кезде біз қиналатын жағдайлар болады, менің ойымша. Жеке мен өзімнің тәжірибемде сондай болған. Ал егер де осы бағанағы translanguaging pedagogy'ді қолдансақ, сол проблемаларды шешуге болады деп есептеймін. But first of all, I think it's necessary to share that scholars like Hote and Tian have already developed a framework for kind of using students' backgrounds in teaching genre pedagogy, right? So they call it culturally sustaining SFL, where SFL and translanguaging can be aligned conceptually and pedagogically for more asset-based pedagogies. So they point out different alignments of this two different pedagogies in terms of the significance of context. Yani бұл жерде студенттердің мәдениетін және де жергілікті жағдайды және де жергілікті тілдердің регистрлерін қарастырып, оларды ескереді. And they acknowledge the dynamic use of students' semiotic repertoires. And they also agree in terms of the departure from the binary of home and school literacies and recognition of new contextualized academic language. Yani бұл жердегі айтқым келгені, ағылшын тілі бөлек, және де орыс тілі, қазақ тілі тілдері бөлек қарастырмайды, олар бірге қарастырылып, сабақ бергенде ескеріледі. Yani бұл жердегі осы SFL педагогикасында.
Кешіріңіз, менде бір уточнить ететін нәрсе бар да, жаңағы background либо native language-да қолданған кезде ана тілін, басқа бір білетін тілді қолданғанда, бұның SFL-дің несі, framework, translation, grammar, помните, старый же метод есть, соның негізінен келеді ма, бастау алады ма, негізінен емес, содан дүние ма бұл?
Translation, grammar деген нәрселер.
бар ғой ескі. Мысалға IELTS-ты создавать еткен кезде ең бірінші стандарттар IELTS examination. Сол translation and grammar системасында болған. Бірақ ол кейін нефункциональный болғаннан кейін ол өзгертіліп отырды. Бірақ они показывали вот на родном языке как будет звучать на английском языке. Если 30-шы жылдардағы IELTS тест, examination тесттің форматтарын алып қарасаңыз, ескі. Соны қазір кішкене келетін сияқты содан бастап алады.
Бұл жерде, яғни мақсаты бұл жердегі бұл педагогиканың студенттердің білетін нәрселерін ескеру ғой. Яғни бағанағы сіз айтып жатсыз ғой, ол педагогиканы жоққа шығарып, яғни жарамайтындайға шығарып тастады дедіңіз, дұрыс па? Бірақ ол жердегі сұрақ, who did that? I'm just wondering about that. Who claimed that pedagogy does not work?
Оны шығарып тастаған жоқ, просто ол один из старых, как скажем, как же называется, традиционных методов из первоначальных. Вначале вот латинский язык болған кезде библияларда это сол жақтан басталып шет тілде үйренудің бір жолы болған. Ана тілінде қалай, ал басқа библияның тілінде қалай, да? И содан кейін, да, содан келген. Одан кейін коммуникативный шықты, басқалар шықты да, и ананың рөлі кішкене төмендеп қалды. Да, больше функционально прагматический неге кетіп қалды да.
I think what we need to consider is this pedagogy's purpose, first of all. So I think that the methodology that you mentioned definitely works in specific areas, right? And of course, I'm not proposing just using that pedagogy or just using L1 all the time. It is something that needs to be considered judiciously, right? So, but translation is definitely a part of this more socially just pedagogies that consider students' existing linguistic repertoires while teaching English instead of just focusing on English only and limiting students to using English only while learning English, right? So I think that we need to consider that. So generally, there are a lot of overlaps between CSSFL and Translanguaging, but I definitely learned about both of these over the last few years more, and I saw both their value as well as some room for improvement. And considering that, I think we as multilingual instructors who share similar repertoires with our students can benefit from pushing this fascinating pedagogy further using a translanguaging lens. So the purpose of my presentation is generally to kind of propose a genre pedagogy informed by both theories, right? In order to disrupt monolingual norms, like treating English as the only language that should exist in the classroom, and also discarding all the other languages, right? And taking a more decolonizing approach to teaching genres in English language. So let's dive in. So I think you are very familiar with the context of Kazakhstan, so I will not spend too much time talking about it, but I think that even in our trilingual education policy, languages are treated as separate languages that do not really overlap with each other or should not really be used in the same space. So we idealize full proficiency in Kazakh, Russian, and English, right, as separate languages. And I think it does not really make sense because translanguaging is such a commonplace practice for meaning making, right? And a lot of us, I think, as teachers, especially when working with students who are just learning English, we intuitively rely on all different languages that we know and our students know, right? But unfortunately, translanguaging, I think, is not always appreciated as either a meaning-making practice or a pedagogical resource. And you can find more about that in scholarship by Goodman and others. And also in the Faculty of Education of one EMI institution in Kazakhstan, which I think you know, which is across the road literally from you guys, right? EAP instructors report using SFL-based genre pedagogy to develop students' field, tenor, and mode-related knowledge in English language genres. So this is something written by Philip Montgomery, an incoming assistant professor at Nazarbayev University right now. Again, the pedagogical approaches are rooted in Anglophone monolingual norms, right? So Is there any consideration of students' Kazakh and Russian languages or any other languages that you might be familiar with? Probably not. But I think it's worth acknowledging that our students have a very solid knowledge of different languages, right? Not just English. So I think that a lot of them are very proficient in Russian as well as Kazakh. So студенттеріміздің орыс және қазақ тілі білімдерін қалай ескереміз? Себебі олар 11-12 жыл бойы білім алады, дұрыс па сол тілдерді көбінесе? Unless they go to some international schools or NIS where they might study exclusively or concurrently in several languages. So we need to think of that. Okay, and it is, again, important to consider students' existing genre knowledge, not just their knowledge of those 3 languages in general, right? Себебі олар студенттер орыс тілінде де эссе жазады, қазақ тілінде де шығарма жазады, дұрыс па? Резюмелерінде сол тілдерде жазады, бірақ соларды қалай біз ескерсек болады, салыстырсақ болады, және де оларды қалай сабақ үстінде өз білімдерін бөлісуге шақыруға болады, соны ескерсек болады, менің ойымша. So these are studies that highlight the impact of SFL, which is culturally sustaining SFL. So Hoda and Tian share that we can see that in both of the studies, the instructors used this pedagogy to create a translanguaging space in which students and sometimes the instructors themselves engage in translanguaging. яғни осы педагогика арқылы студенттер ғана емес, сонымен қатар мұғалім де өзінің білетін тілдерін ашық қолдана алады да, мысалға. Яғни менің өзім тәжірибемде тек қана студенттер ғана кейде қазақша орыс тілін қазақша немесе орысша сөйлейтін еді, бірақ мұғалім ретінде мен тек қана ағылшынша сөйлеу керекпін деген сезім болатын еді. Ал осындай педагогиканы қолданған жағдайда, яғни менің де қазақ немесе орыс тілі білімімді көрсетуіме болады, осында да. But that's one thing you can consider, of course. And both instructors in both studies had extensive knowledge of SFL and had a translanguaging stance, and they engage in deconstruction of Anglophone genre texts, right? For example, in Hote, the genre was persuasive essays. And in the second study, which is Troyan, right? The instructor used narratives and description of plants. So in your case, what kind of genres do you think you could deconstruct? I think that Aigera mentioned conference proceedings, right? And also problem solution essays, right? And cause and effect essays. So you can deconstruct specific examples that come from the West, right? And then you can think of what is really considered in developing this text, like what kind of ideologies are there. And the first study, in the first study, Hote, or the researcher, reports that his students' register shifted, alas, only in English. So they were considering their knowledge of different registers, like more official and more informal, right? While in the second study, the instructor also only draws on colonial languages and ignores the African American variations of English, at least according to what I inferred from the article. But in both studies, students also benefited from engaging in culturally sustaining SFL because they were able to raise their critical language awareness, right? So what's next? I think that it's important to consider if there is more space for using and developing genre knowledge in students' other languages like Kazakh and Russian, for example, for us. So let's look at genre pedagogy for that. I think it's really important to think of what's out there already, right? So what is genre pedagogy? For that, I think it would be nice to draw on Nagao's study and Gephardt's study. So first, let's look at Nagao, who provides a 5-stage teaching and learning cycle. I think that in some stages, we can definitely see or include more translanguaging pedagogy. For example, like right now, you can see some translanguaging pedagogy here because we see that students read relevant journals and or articles, not just in English, but also in Japanese here, right? And then they write a summary of what they read, and then they revise it again. So that's like one example of translanguaging pedagogy. But at the same time, there are some issues that I see here, which is, for example, how the instructor was searching for authentic genre text. What is authentic? Is it only something that's produced in the West, or is it something that we also see among our students, right? So that's something we need to consider. But generally, you can see the 5 stages here. So the first one is building the context, in which the goal is to understand the purpose of the text and when the target text is used, right? And then there are some scaffolding tasks that you can use. And then the second stage that was implemented in 2 weeks was modeling and deconstructing an existing text, which is to understand the structure and the lexicogrammatical features of the target genre text, right? So in your case, it can be problem solution or something else. And then there's some joint construction with other students as well as the teacher in the classroom, right? And then there's some independent construction of the text. And then there are some repeated stages here as well. So some modeling and deconstruction of an existing text again, because we know that one time may not be enough for teaching one genre text, right? Or one genre to our students. And then at the very end of this course, they linked the related texts. So I think that generally the structure of this pedagogy is pretty useful. It's called teaching and learning cycle, right? So there are specific cycles, and you can definitely adjust these cycles. You don't have to just use what's out there without any changes, right? Because I think that in your case, you have midterms, right? And some other things. So you may not be able to do all of this, or you may skip certain stages. But generally, it gives a very good idea of what is possible and what's been done out there theoretically and practically. So now we can take a look at Gephardt, Meg Gephardt. She's a scholar in the US and usually works with pre-service teachers. But I think that in this example, we can see how she did some genre and register analysis of an email to a professor. So she just took emails that students wrote to her, and then she analyzed that with her students, right? So let's take a look at this. So for instance, in this stage, in stage 1 here, building the context, and stage 2, which is modeling and deconstructing an existing text, I think that we can do something similar to Gephardt. So what she does here is, again, she splits the text into stages, right? Like greeting, statement of institutional identity, and then statement of request, additional information to support the request, and closing signature. But what can we do in order to consider our students' backgrounds? яғни не істесек болады? яғни имейлді тек қана ағылшын тілінде ғана емес, сонымен қатар орыс тілінде немесе қазақ тілінде егер студенттеріміз жазып жататын болса, сол мысалдарды алып келіп, салыстырмалы түрде үйретсек болады да. Яғни одан кейін имейлдары тек қана мысалға шетелдік кітаптардың ішінде жазылған нәрсесін ғана емес, сонымен қатар интернеттегі бар мысалдарды қарастырсақ болады. Яғни because we know that Englishes are different everywhere, right? So what is used in the US may not be the same thing as the emails that people write, let's say in Asia or in Russia or in Kazakhstan or any other part of the world. So we need to consider the variations in the norms of different genres, right? Because they are not universal. Genres are very, very contextual, and I think that it's really important to acknowledge that, because I'm not sure if we always consider where the text comes from. Like, for example, сіздер өздеріңіз мысалы тексттерді аласыздар ба, қосасыздар ғой презентацияларыңызға. Сол кезде ол тексттің қайдан келгенін, не үшін ол текстті таңдағаныңызды қарастырасыздар ма, сол туралы ойлайсыздар ма мысалға? Well, it's an open question, of course. So think of that. I think it's really important to reflect on the sources of our text, right? So let's go and look at some other stuff. So this is something that I think might be able to supplement the existing frameworks of genre pedagogy, right? So there are a few scholars who have done some research on translanguaging and its use in writing instruction. So we can see some examples from these 2 studies, right? Raffi and Morgan, and then Garcia, Ibarra, Johnson, and Zeltzer. In the first study, translanguaging is used in writing instruction as a scaffold, which means that they use translation, alteration of input and output languages. So translation, we know what that means. Alteration of input and output languages. For example, they might have looked at text in English, but then, or texts in English, but then discuss those texts in Russian or Kazakh if it doesn't make sense for the students, right? Especially for students that are lower level, let's say, I don't know, B1 or A2. I'm not sure about the students' levels right now, but I think that when we just started teaching at I2, there were students that had a very hard time learning academic writing because of their emerging English, right? So we need to consider that. And then they also looked at the communicative norms across different modes for cross-linguistic analysis. So they considered transition words in Bangla and also English. So we can also look at that in our existing languages. So like Russian and Kazakh and Russian or some other languages. And also they looked at writing conventions, right? So how do students write in Kazakh and how do they write or how do they need to write in in English, sorry. For example, in the study here, Bangla, which is the language of Bangladesh, right? They write inductively, while in English they write more deductively. So we need to think of that. And then also they consider how translanguaging benefits students' identity performances, because there is some acknowledgement of students' identities as not just English learners, but also people that know some other languages, right? So we are acknowledging their existing identities and empowering them. So in the next study here, this is like a textbook, right? And in this textbook, there are several focal teachers that engage in various stages of the translanguaging design cycle to explore for building context. So these words are in Spanish because they worked with teachers who are like in the borderland, right? Which is like an area between the US and Mexico. So they explored different texts for building context. They evaluated for critical engagement. They imagined for helping students. They created and redesigned and built a new understanding and presented for collaboration, peer editing, and other feedback activities, and implemented ideas and opportunities for students to use the final design and ideas. So I basically draw on different aspects of translanguaging in writing instruction in order to reimagine genre pedagogy, right? And I invite you to contribute to this discussion with me. So what can we do? Okay, so just to kind of give you an example of what I have done, this paper is actually based on my teaching experience at Astana IT University. It was published in the Journal of Second Language Writing, I think well, it was published in winter, but it was it was officially released this March. So you can take a look at what I did. It's just one example, and I definitely think that there is a lot more space for translanguaging informed genre pedagogy, but I think that we need to start somewhere, right? So you can think of like what I did well and what I could do better in your own context, right? So in this paper, I considered how I employed translanguaging pedagogy to help my students to write problem solution essays, especially in order to help them with building their outlines and also with citations, because they had some challenges with understanding the text in English, right? Because I think that you might still work with some academic papers, right? So they have to read several papers in English, but as you know, those papers are not easy to read even for very proficient English users, right? Because they are very discipline specific and students might have a really hard time to understand what's out there. So this paper kind of explores that, and you can take a look later. I will share my links here. And what else is out there? So this is almost the end. I think what I wanted to share is like this framework, right? Based on the teaching and learning cycle, as you see here, and then also some strategies based on culturally sustaining SFL genre pedagogy, as well as translanguaging writing pedagogies. So there are 5 stages here. I want to give everyone here some time to kind of consider what's written here. So these are the TLC steps, and then these are the translanguaging informed genre pedagogy strategies, right? And I wonder if everyone has access to at least maybe one assignment that they work on. So like, do you have access to any essay genre or like some other thing that you worked on recently? And can you take a look at that assignment and just see what you could possibly do based on these strategies? And of course, I'm not saying that you need to adjust or adapt like all the different strategies here, right? But I think it's good to have some options. So, and I think that there's quite a lot of options here. So for like generally like setting the stage for such pedagogy, I think that there are some overarching strategies that you can use. For example, that's to adopt the translanguaging classroom framework, which you can read a bit more about in Garcia and others' book. And then it's important to be mindful of the power dynamics among the languages and other elements in the context, right? So why are we teaching in standard ways? Why are we not considering this or that, like, for example, students' languages and so on? And I understand that we need to consider the university's language policy as well, right? And what is seen as the good practice in teaching English. And then it's important to co-create and sustain a translanguaging space in and beyond the classroom, right? By modeling and encouraging translanguaging throughout the teaching and learning cycle, not just at the very beginning, right? So just saying, hey guys, you can use some Kazakh and Russian while texting to friends, that's not enough, right? So you need to constantly and explicitly encourage certain strategies with your students. And it's also, of course, important to consider content standards or language objectives and translanguaging objectives, right? So these things come from the department or the university, right? So what are the general goals of your discipline or your course? And then what kind of objectives from translanguaging pedagogy can you really set for your students? So this is something you can consider. And then these are the common strategies or common stages of TLC for which you can, again, ask some big questions, right? You can ask your students to discuss certain things about the target genre in any language, because it's hard to prohibit them to speak from speaking in Kazakh or Russian, right? So why not embrace it and just allow them to express themselves freely, as well, as long as they share their like results with you in English or some other language. So you can discuss the genre text and then its purpose and reader-writer relationships, right? And then you can connect students' future studies, career, institution identity, community, and the target genre. So for example, if you're teaching them how to write a resume, why not consider how resumes are written, let's say in Kazakhstan, in Russian and Kazakh, right? Because that definitely informs the expectations from students, right? And then, of course, you can consider how to support reading about the context, right? So you can ask them to explore certain resources in the Kazakh internet, right? Or the Russian internet, or KNet or RNet, I don't know. And also what's available at Astana IT University and the community around the students. Yeah. Then we have deconstruction. You can find sample texts, not just in English from the West, but also Kazakh and Russian, as I said, right? And you can guide students intuitive analysis. You can engage in cross-linguistic analysis. You can write, you can discuss the writing conventions in English as well as other languages. LOTE means languages other than English. So I'm sorry for not sharing that earlier. And yeah, there are a lot of strategies here. So I will stop here and I will let you ask your questions if you have any. Thank you.
Thank you, Sir Bolson. I don't have questions, but I'd
Thank
like
you.
to add a comment if possible.
Sorry?
I don't have questions, but I would like to add a quick comment if
course, yeah.
possible. Yeah,
Of
talking about the second stage, building the context. I guess I have tried using this translanguaging genre technique within the building the context stage, particularly in this table. Since with our academic writing course, students conduct focus group interviews. They work with their peers, conducting brief interviews, and what I have noticed, and I haven't prevented them from doing so, they did use different languages, particularly Kazakh, Russian, and English, while conducting those focus group interviews, and clarified some ideas they struggle to share in English.
That's amazing. Thank you so much
Yeah,
for sharing that.
that helped. Yeah, that helped students to share their experiences, perceptions in a more detailed way, I believe. Thank you.
Thank you so much for sharing that. And I feel like when we see such productive group work, right, in translanguaging or in multiple languages, we need to kind of note that down and maybe share that as an example of how to engage in like group work, right? Because if you see that other students are also struggling, why not set these students as an example for others and say that, hey guys, you can take advantage of your languages, not just English, but also your knowledge of Kazakh and Russian, right? So that's so
Yeah,
beautiful. Thank you so much. Yeah.
definitely. Yeah, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
I think so. I just wanted to comment. It's not a question. Probably you, Siriposan, you may have some ideas how to organize all the things. So once we are talking about translanguaging or using first or second background language for
Mm-hmm.
improving English, right?
Mm-hmm.
So on the basis of the students' written assignments or
Mm-hmm.
speaking assignments and a frequency of their mistakes in syntaxes or whatever grammar part.
Mm-hmm.
So can this be analysis of all those mistakes can be served as a good maybe considering different technique approach or method for teaching that part of grammar in
Mm-hmm.
English.
Mm. So this is like a very big and challenging question, of course, but I think that we can definitely take advantage of students' whole linguistic repertoire in order to kind of help them achieve specific academic goals, right? And I'm not saying that translanguaging is the goal for them because I know that you expect them to produce standard English or like specific kind of English in their text, right? So I think that you can consider translanguaging in some cases as some transition stage, right? And then allow them to discuss the mistakes that you notice. And of course, I think that's one option. I'm not sure if I understood your question correctly, but I think that considering translanguaging and kind of comparing their existing languages with English and explaining why something is seen as a mistake would be a good idea. Like, so you can for example, you can explain how they are drawing on their knowledge of Russian instead of the common genre expectations in English, right? And say that, hey, I understand why you are doing this, and I know that it's right in Russian or Kazakh, but in English, people or instructors expect you to write like this, and it is because of that or this. So I think that maybe explaining like that would make more sense instead of just saying, hey, this is wrong, you know? So that's one idea I have right now. But I think that if I see specific examples, maybe we could come up with better strategies and more productive strategies that are, I guess, less punitive and more encouraging. Because to me, translanguaging kind of acknowledges students' identities too, right? And instead of framing them as deficit-based, instead of framing them as problems for not knowing English only, I think that we can kind of treat everything more positively, basically, especially their multilingual backgrounds. Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Yeah.
Okay, also have one question.
Yes,
Sirposan.
I. Yeah.
So, as for the some ideas that you have shown here, like the construction, some other issues, yeah, we're also to some extent applying, but not in the context of comparing with the Kazakh or Russian, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So I guess it might be good at the very beginning, yeah. So
Mm-hmm.
because we don't have enough time, frankly speaking, look here. So we're just expecting it to be done by the other subjects like Kazakh or Russian language, yeah, because at least it might happen in the mind of the students that they are starting comparing. In English we do like this. In Kazakh it's like done this. So it kind of some subconscious ideas, yeah, to our extent. So what do you think that nowadays, what Zhibek was commenting, that how to make them observe their grammar mistakes or some syntax mistakes, but what we're having now, our PCs are provided all this job automatically. So all the grammar mistakes, all the punctuation, everything is corrected by the program itself. So what's the point of teaching this as everything is done by a computer?
I see what you mean. I
Yeah, the
honestly
next
think
one.
I think that
Yeah.
we kind of had some solution for that even when we were working together. And I think that in teaching writing, sometimes we focus on just the product, right? Or the end result.
Yeah.
And then we can instead shift that to process-based writing pedagogy, which I think is what we are trying to do with this pedagogy here, because we are focusing on the little details and the processes that we engage in while developing our text. And I think that if you ask your students to reflect on the process and maybe even explain you how they arrived at a result that you see, that would be like a great strategy for avoiding like the over-reliance on generative AI and computers and other things, right? Which is a common issue, from what I understand. So that's one thing we can do. And honestly, I think that maybe translanguaging would prevent that from happening as well, because you are gonna like value their explanation and process more by relying on their like background knowledge, right? Rather than just asking them to produce something in standard English. So that's one thing we can probably engage in. And also what I thought about is яғни бұл жерде біздің аудиториямызда қазір қазақ тілі, орыс тілі мамандары бар ма? Қандай тілдерді үйретеді бұл жерде қазір айтуда?
Ағылшын.
Жоқ, мына жерде инструкторлар тек қана ағылшын тілі
қазақ тілі және орыс тілінікі бар.
Иә, менде мынандай ой болған негізі, осы, яғни үш тілде де сабақ береді, үш тілде де сабақ беретін инструкторлар бірігіп негізі өз тілдеріндегі осындай жанра стандарттарын салыстырып, немесе бір-біріне көмектесе қайтеді тіпті. Себебі студенттеріміз үш тілде де меңгеру керек, дұрыс па? Сабақ бітіргеннен кейін, осы, яғни программасын аяқтаған кезде, бір-біріне қалай көмектесуге болады деген нәрсені ескеру керек сияқты менің ойымша. Және де ол негізі кейбір университеттерде ол нәрсе қазір де қарастырылады. Яғни бірақ әртүрлі тілдерді білмеймін енді. Мысалға, менің қазір жұмыс істейтін университетімде Vantage College деген жер бар. Ол bridge программ, яғни ол жерде студенттерді бір жыл бойымен академиялық тілді үйретіп дайындайды да. Бірақ ол жерде бүкіл инструкторлар контент инструкторлар және тілдің инструкторлары бірігіп жұмыс істейді, бірге жоспар құрады. Менің ойымша сол сияқты әртүрлі тілді үйрететін инструкторларда бірігіп жоспарларын салыстырып, және де мысалға қазақ тілінен сабақ берген кезде қандай әсерлерді қарастырасыздар, соны мысалға ағылшын тіл мамандарымен бөліссеңіздер, ағылшын тіл мамандары қазақ тіл мамандарымен бөліссе, және де талқылап ұқсастықтарын немесе айырмашылықтарын ескерсе, менің ойымша соның өзі қандай көмек болар еді студенттерге. Себебі менің ойымша мен өзім мысалға магистратура оқыған кезде қазақ тілінің инструкторлары олардың сұрағаны мүлдем басқаша болатын ағылшын тіліне қарағанда. Бірақ біз түсінбейтінбіз неге. Себебі біз ағылшын тілін үйреніп алып, қазақ тілінде де тура солай жазсам болады ғой деп ойлайтын едік біз. Менің ойымша соны алдын ала ескеріп, соны талқылайтын болса, менің ойымша студенттерге көмегі көп болады сияқты да. So I think we can also consider the differences so that students do not have those mistakes that Aelita mentioned, right? Or some other mistakes that they might face while working on their Kazakh or Russian languages. Again, if you know the answers to certain questions, why not share them as an FAQ, right? And discuss them in advance with students rather than trying to solve the problems later on, especially if those problems are very similar all the time.
So even if you do remember APA style, so do you remember
Sorry,
our
once again?
experience? So APA style, do you remember the
Yeah, of
experience
course.
when we were teaching them? So APA, so if they go to other subjects, for example, they teach GHOST standards, yeah, or some, for example, IT specialist, IEEE. So it means that we teach different things inside one university, frankly speaking. And I understand how it is challenging for the students to cover all this issue. Even if you know point, for example, in APA like this, in IEEE like in GHOST like this, it's not the same thing anyway. So yeah,
Oh my
they
God.
might hear you, but might consider it into account when doing, but still there's some kind of diverse by these ideas in general.
I think that I totally understand the issue here, and I think that like creating some sort of I guess resource where all these standards are compared may be a good idea. And I feel like this is not something you can teach in one lesson or two lessons, right? There
Yeah.
should be like a resource that's available to them all the time, and like a writing center where they can go and work on this together with that professional. And I'm sure that you are working on that, but I don't think there's like a one-time solution for this. So that's a different challenge, I think.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you for your question and comment.
Эколекс, сұрақтарыңыз бар ма тағы да? Қазақ тілінің оқытушылары, орыс тілінің оқытушылары, осында болсаңыздар. Ағылшын тілінің оқытушылары.
Пока люди думают, AI, как боретесь с AI? Какой-то policy прописанный есть?
Кстати, ол туралы, это очень интересный вопрос, по идее. В нашем университете сейчас постоянно об этом разговаривают. Честно сказать, я сам не знаю, какие эффективные решения есть, потому что, мне кажется, никто не знает, как именно эту проблему решить, да, но, опять же, I think if you make your writing pedagogy more process focused, you can definitely address this issue a little better, and that involves openly acknowledging AI and its use, and also maybe even showing how not to use it, as well as some like benefits of AI in teaching writing, right? So you can show what it can benefit while writing, but also show why it doesn't work, because there's like some, let's say, hallucinations and also repetitive ideas and so on, right? So like being open and maybe discussing it with students rather than treating it as the elephant in the room would be like the first step, or the general, I guess, philosophy in dealing with AI, because it's definitely here to stay, and I'm not sure if it's going away at all.
So while you're doing your thesis, are you supposed to in some stages of your research to do to use this AI? For
Yeah, of
example,
course.
analysis. Yeah, so you're supposed.
I'm not planning to use it in my analysis, but I definitely use it to proofread my writing, honestly, because here what I'm dealing with is that I'm still expected to produce writing in standard English, right? And there are certain things that you may kind of forget. And I think that creating prompts with your students would be also helpful. Like, how can you strategically use AI, and how can you write prompts for that? And for writing prompts, you need to know English well, right? So I think that even helping your students write those prompts with you would be something so cool. And that can be done for, let's say, building the context, right? For example, that's the first step here. So like, how can you build context using AI? Or how can you deconstruct text? For example, you can put an essay in ChatGPT and ask ChatGPT what the stages are or what certain things are, right? So I think that it can be involved even in this pedagogy. And this is something that I worked on like about 2 years ago. So it needs to be updated considering AI, right? But that's one thing I think we can do. And also for building the context, I think that you can ask ChatGPT to provide different examples of like essays. But again, you need to treat it with precaution because it tends to hallucinate, right? And you cannot just blindly rely on it, for the lack of a better word. So yeah. And also, I just wanted to kind of quickly, I guess, recap it. So what I said generally allows to create and maintain a translanguaging space in English for academic writing purposes, right? And then you can build on the shared genre knowledge in English and the languages other than English, especially considering that I think most of our instructors here speak the same languages as the students, right? Is there anyone who does not know the students' languages, like Kazakh and Russian? I would be surprised if the answer is yes, right? So you can also use translanguaging as more than just scaffolding. It can be used for also empowering students' identities and even at higher levels, right? Because honestly, it doesn't go away, and that's totally normal. And you can also develop genre knowledge, not just in English, but also students' other languages. So you can simultaneously teach them how to write not just in English, but also Kazakh and Russian, because that's beneficial to the instructors here, right? яғни бір жанраны үйретіп жатқан кезде тек қана ағылшын тілінде қалай жазуды емес, сонымен қатар олардың қазақ тілінде және де орыс тілінде жазу қабілеттерін жақсартуға болады. Яғни әсіресе бұны бірге жоспарласаңыздар осы жердегі мамандармен, менің ойымша тиімді стратегияларды табуға болатын сияқты. So yeah. And I also wanted to share some resources that might be useful for you. So this is like a Google Drive where you can find the articles in this list and also some other things that you might benefit from. So feel free to scan this QR code or use this link. Yeah, tiny.cc/EAP articles.
Говорит, что это QR не найдет действительный QR-код. Или от того, что я с экрана не делаю.
Онда қазір тұратыңыздар. Мына ссылканы қолдансаңыздар болады ма? Мен осы жерге жазып берейінші.
Онда презентацияны бөлісе аласыз ба? Біз
Давайте
өзіміздің...
қазір бөлсем прям.
Иә, қазір емес, кейінірек бөлсеңіз, сол кезде...
Жақсы.
Открывается, не проблема.
Все тогда.
Серік болсын?
Ау?
Сіз Серік болсын Тастанбек дегеннен кейін скобканың ішіне хим деп қойыпсыз ғой, это по тренду Запада, что ли? Или это не вы написали?
Нет, это не тренд, это как бы there are a lot of people of different genders and different identities, and I think that it's like one thing I can do to be inclusive and to share that people can refer to me as he, him. So yeah, it's not a trend, but like it's something useful. Yeah. Yeah. Ahmed. And
Серік болсын, сізге көптен көп рахмет. Сіз осылай мүмкіндігіңіз болып, үлкен жұмыстардың ішінде, зерттеулердің ішінде уақыт тауып, айтқан ұсыныс, коллегаларымыздың айтқан ұсынысын қабылдап, осындай семинар бергеніңізге, зерттеуіңіздің бөліскеніңізге бір бөлігіменен сізге үлкен табыстар тілеймін, шығармашылық табыстар тілеймін, денсаулығыңыз мықты болсын, және осы жасап жатқан ғылыми зерттеуіңізден өзіңізге бір жақсы шабыт алып, қуат алатындай сізге және халыққа, елге, тіл үйретушілерге, студенттерге пайдасы тиетіндей ғылымға, жаңа жаңалықтарға алып келетін бір жұмыс болсын жасап жатқан еңбегіңіз. Сізге көптен көп рахмет. Бұл соңғы жалғыз семинар деп ойламаймын. Әлі де мүмкіндігіңіз болса тағы да бөлісіп жатарсыз деп ойлаймын. Егер де жаңағы ссылкалар